And Rand Paul has no jobs plan. We have 10% unemployment in this state, and his jobs plan is to say that sometimes our workers are just going to have to take lower wages, and they need a little tough love. Well, that's no jobs plan. Again, I want folks to go to my website at jackconway.org, check out the hometown tax credit. It's not going to solve all of our problems, but according to Moody's, it would create about 11,000 jobs in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. A lot of people are afraid that the government's growing and jobs aren't being created. I'm a different type of Democrat. We need to provide incentives to the private sector to create the jobs of the future.
Rand Paul, 30 seconds.
Let me interpret for you. He is for forced unionization bill. The Employee Free Choice Act gets rid of the secret ballot. We'll have bounding arbitration, which will supersede private contracts. Big mistake for Kentucky. Will cause loss of jobs, not creation of jobs. The prevailing wage in Kentucky has lost jobs. It causes our schools to be more expensive. So be very clear what his position is. He is for the bill.
Joe Arnold.
And that's the follow-up. You said some sort of mediation. So the bill as written is this federally forced binding arbitration. Do you specifically support that?
What I would like to see is a mediation process after some period of time. If both sides can't agree, some sort of mediation process to ask them to sit down and arrive at a contract within a reasonable period of time.
Rand Paul.
My understanding is he will vote for the bill. I will vote against the bill. That makes it a little more simple, I think.
Okay, Joe Girth, question for Dr. Paul.
Yes, Dr. Paul, you've criticized Jack Conway for campaigning or raising money outside of Kentucky and challenged him to return his salary to the state for those days. Will you promise now that if elected, you will return to the federal government or give to a charity any pay that you earn on days when you are campaigning outside of Kentucky for either yourself or your father?
If skipping votes, yes. But you know, the interesting thing is he has been gone. He's gone over half of September in California with Nancy Pelosi raising money. And the thing is we want him to do his job here. He wants to blame the drug problem on me. I'm a small town physician in Bowling Green. I'm not responsible for the drug problem. He's the chief law enforcement officer of the state, and meth labs have doubled under his watch. Prescription drug problem is rising. All of the pressing nature to the drug issue should come back to him. He's the one in charge, for goodness sakes.
Go.
Well, it's interesting. As of our latest campaign finance report, I think more than 70% of my money was from in-state, and more than 70% of his was out of state. I don't think there's any question who Kentuckians are supporting. So it's another instance here. Rand Paul just doesn't think the rules apply to him. Look at this story this week about Kentucky Taxpayers United. He just made up, evidently, 1,000 dues-paying members. They didn't file their paperwork. He's been going around the state saying that he's the head of the Kentucky Taxpayers United for the last 10 years. And there have been numerous stories this week that show that the organization didn't even exist. What was he doing there?
Hey, Joe Girth, had a follow-up.
Yeah, Dr. Paul, you said you would return money if you're missing votes. Do you view your job as a senator as being more than voting?
I think that's the primary job, and I think he should return his money because he's actually not doing his job. All of the problems that he's in charge of are getting worse, and he was out of state just about half of September, traveling, trying to troll for cash in California. So yes, I think he should return his.
I was not in California for half of September trolling for cash, I can assure you of that. And the ad you're talking about, meth, was declared false and was actually taken down by 2 stations where it was aired. So I have been a working attorney general, and you look at my record, I've taken on the pharmaceutical industry. Medicaid fraud collections are up over 600%. I've taken on the special interests. I've taken 86,000 child porn images off of the internet. Our new cyber crimes unit is training law enforcement officers all across the state. We've probably brought the state farther in the area of cyber crimes in the last few years than any other state in the country. I'm proud of that record.
Craig Stottlemyre, a question for Jack Conway.
You have called your opponent a constitution minimalist with radical views. How can you defend the claim that Paul would dismantle Social Security, Medicare, mine safety regulations, the minimum wage, etc.? Does his views go too far? How can you defend that? I mean, you've gone all the way to saying he will dismantle those programs.
Well, Rand Paul's on record is saying that the federal defense budget will be much smaller, but he wants the federal defense budget to be 80 or 90% of the total budget. That's the future that he sees. He's on record as saying that we haven't followed the Constitution in this country since 1937. He said we haven't followed the proper avenue for mine safety since 1936. He said we need to go back to a pre-World War II system of health care where doctors negotiate directly with patients. In 1937, it's no accident, the Supreme Court upheld Social Security. In 1936, in a case called Carter-Cole, the Supreme Court decided that the Commerce Clause was broad enough to regulate coal mine safety. And I'm glad they did, because we were losing 1,500 coal miners a year back in the 1930s. And during World War II, the Blue Cross Blue Shield system arose, and you had direct reimbursement for certain services. Rand Paul doesn't like that. He calls himself a constitutional conservative rather than a libertarian. He would take us back to a point where we don't have federal law enforcement, where we don't have mine safety laws, and we question the constitutionality of all these advances we've had since the 1930s.
Dr. Paul?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. He makes up positions, and then we argue made-up positions. I'm not for eliminating Social Security. I'm not for eliminating Medicare, and I'm not for eliminating mine safety regulations. So why don't you stop that so we can have an intelligent debate? The thing is we have to decide which direction to go, which regulations work, which don't work. We have to figure out how to fund Medicare and Social Security for the baby boomers. There are problems. We're living longer and there are more retired people. He says he's not for any changes ever to Medicare and Social Security. That won't work.
Jack Conway, you appear to be chomping at the bit, so I think I'm going to give you 30 seconds.
Well, I have outlined a couple of provisions here for Medicare. Going to bulk purchasing allows $200 billion in savings. Medicare fraud units allow about $100 billion in savings. There's significant savings right there. But he puts forward all this stuff. Social Security is a Ponzi scheme and ought to be privatized, and a $2,000 deductible. And I'm sick and tired of him putting forward policies that are so callous and calling them courageous. I want to tell the seniors of Kentucky tonight, I am never going to balance the budget on their backs.
Rand Paul, 30 seconds.
What was that you said? Never going to balance the budget?
On their backs.
Yeah. Never going to balance the budget.
On their backs.
The thing is we do have to figure out how to fund Social Security and Medicare. The baby boomers are going to retire. We have 42 million people retired now. We're getting ready to have 77 million people retired. We have to figure out how to fund it. It will ultimately mean changes for younger people and for wealthier people. If you don't believe that and you're not willing to have an adult discussion about it, then we get nowhere towards fixing it. The longer we put off fixing it, the worse the problem gets.
Last question, Gene Burke for Dr. Paul.
Dr. Paul, there's been much discussion at the federal level about creating less dependence on non-renewable energy sources like coal and oil. Do you favor such a move? And if you do, how do you explain that position to people working in Kentucky's coal industry?
All right. If elected, I'll probably be the biggest defender of the coal industry and the coal workers and the miners that we have in the United States, because it's a big Kentucky industry. It employs over 100,000 people. But the interesting thing is I'm not opposed to other forms of energy. I think we should keep developing other forms of energy. I'm in favor of nuclear. I'm in favor of wind. I'm in favor of hydroelectric. You name it, I'm in favor of it. The ultimate decisions, though, on which energy form is the best are determined by the marketplace. 300 million people in America get to vote every day. It's called democratic capitalism. We vote on what's sold at Walmart. We vote on whether Walmart succeeds or Target succeeds. We vote on whether we're going to use coal or nuclear. What we have is a marketplace that determines these, and the great thing about it is that maximizes the freedom of the individual to participate in what they get. But yes, I'm in favor of all forms of energy, but we will continue to burn coal, I would think, for several more generations.
Jack Conway, 30 seconds.
Sure. I think I just heard him say that he says he wants to be one of the strongest advocates for miners, yet he's on record as saying he would take federal mine safety protections back to where they were in the 1930s. We were losing 1,500 miners a year in the 1930s. He's also on record as saying that coal is one of the least desirable forms of energy. I've actually stood up for Kentucky coal, and I'm against cap and trade, and I've taken on the EPA when they've tried to foist it upon us. So I'm going to stand up for Kentucky coal, and I also think that we need to explore the new energy economy because the jobs of the future are going to be created in the new energy economy.
Okay, now we go into the closing statements. Mr. Conway, you go first, 60 seconds.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you to the University of Louisville and to our ABC affiliates, and it was a pleasure to join you here tonight. You know, in about 16 days, the voters of Kentucky have an important choice to make. And elections are about choices. And we have one here between myself, who would put Kentucky first, and someone like Rand Paul, who fundamentally doesn't understand the Commonwealth of Kentucky. As Attorney General, I've gone after the scourge of drugs. Rand Paul says that drugs aren't a pressing issue. As Attorney General, I've gone after crimes. And I understand, unlike Rand Paul, that sometimes nonviolent actions are indeed a crime. I am also going to stand up and protect our seniors. I'm going to stand up for Medicare. Rand Paul is for a $2,000 deductible for Medicare, and he's called Social Security a Ponzi scheme that ought to be privatized. Our seniors simply can't afford that. We have 12,000 newly disabled veterans in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Rand Paul has spoken out against the Americans with Disabilities Act. What is he going to say to them? And I will always, always stand up for workplace safety protections. I'm humbled to ask for your vote on November the 2nd.
Now you can applaud. Dr. Paul, 1 minute. Closing statement.
When this debate ends, you'll notice that I will not be shaking his hand tonight. I will not shake hands with someone who attacks my religion and attacks my Christian beliefs. These are something very personal to me. My wife, my kids, we take it very personally. And I will not be associated with someone who will attack my religion. This election will be about the future of America, who has the best vision. We will try to keep the debate on a higher tone. I hope he will leave my church, my family, and my religion out of it. But who has the best vision for America? Do you believe government is always the answer, or do you believe in the people? Do you believe in the individual entrepreneur, the individual businessman and woman to create jobs? I believe in the individual. I believe in capitalism. I believe we are the greatest nation ever known to man. We're the most humanitarian nation ever known to man. And I will defend those rights. I will keep government out of the way of business. Thank you very much for coming this evening. Thank you for your support.
Those of us at the University of Louisville and WHAS-TV would like to thank both of the candidates for putting yourself out there for public service. We'd like to tell all of you watching at home, go vote on Election Day. Now you've seen the two candidates for U.S. Senate. You've compared them head to head. You can go vote and make your choice on Election Day. I'd also like to thank Hope McLaughlin from the University of Louisville, the entire WHAS-TV staff, and our timer, Meg Waters, who's a freshman in the McConnell Scholars Program here at the University of Louisville. So go vote on Election Day. Thank you very much for joining us from the University of Louisville and WHAS-TV.